Good evening, friends. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in again for another Thursday edition of the SIZWE Book Club. And as is customary, we introduce the program with a bit of music, and that was the music of Oliver Umtukudisi and the song Neria. Oliver passed away a few years ago, fabulous guitarist from Zimbabwe, and that particular song, Neria, is one of my favorites, and I think it's a kind of nice tune to start today's program, which is again this week dedicated to the memory of George Floyd, and we're using last week's program and today's program to reflect again on the event of George Floyd's passing and the significance of the day. Of course, it was committed to Mother Earth last week on Tuesday, 2 days ago, and may his soul rest in peace. But today, we kind of look at the program and pin it around the significance of today's date, and also to think about it in terms of what it means for the struggle for the black person. Today is 11th of June, and if you've been looking on the SIZWE Book Club page on Facebook, you'll have seen some a bit of tidbits around what June 11 means, and how we can use literature and thinking about it to illustrate the struggle of African Americans and black people around the world. First of all, significantly, today is the birthday of South African playwright Athol Fugard. Athol Fugard was a white South African playwright, but he was one of the icons of the anti-apartheid struggle, and his work led him to exile in America and other places as a way of rejecting the oppression of black people in South Africa, his own country. Now, today we're going to pick out again from a literary point of view to talk about Athol Fugard as a playwright. And the book that I've picked out from his body of work is the very famous play called SIZWE BANSI is Dead. SIZWE BANSI is Dead was written and produced for the stage in 1972. It was actually written by him, collaborated with two black South African writers or performers, and it's a very poignant tale. And the background to that book, SIZWE BANSI is Dead, it's about a guy called SIZWE BANSI, and of course another guy called the photographer in his studio. SIZWE BANSI shows up to have his photograph taken, and the story of the play, to kind of paraphrase, is that the play takes place in a photography studio, and it features let me see how to put it again. So two actors who are talking about two experiences. So SIZWE BANSI shows up and in a photograph to take a photograph, and the photograph is taken. The photographer asked him, "What do you want to do with this photograph?" And he says, "I'm going to send it to my wife." And the story leads on to SIZWE BANSI now writing a letter to accompany the photo to his wife, somehow persuaded to tell his wife that to a third person narrative that SIZWE BANSI has died. And it goes on to kind of now take SIZWE BANSI into a different context, where SIZWE finds himself with the other partner in the story. They find a dead body, and they basically rationalize that since SIZWE BANSI is dead, why don't they take the man's papers so that SIZWE can take on the identity of this man who's died, and the story kind of goes on in that way. And it looks like a very simple story, and in fact it's a bit of an absurdity when you look at the narrative, where
showing up in a photography studio leads to a flight of imagination where the person taking the photograph and the photographer kind of collude more or less to take themselves or take the main actor SIZWE into a different kind of theater where he now has to find a job. He's thinking about his wife. His wife is going to be without him, and he's assuming a dead man's identity. But of course, stories are never that simple, because this play by Athol Fugard has been described as having come from his own experience as a court clerk in South Africa under apartheid, where black people were required to carry an ID card, a pass, for them to be able to move around the country. And he was able, as a court clerk, to see the injustices that were impacted on black people merely because they had no freedom and they were treated as, they were like aliens in their own country. And the story of SIZWE BANSI as a man assuming the life of a dead man in order to be able to get a job in the mines and live his life, forsaking his wife and his children where they are in pursuit of that life, illustrates, for example, the indignity suffered by black people in the apartheid system, and which again falls neatly into the experience of African Americans and other black people and Native Americans and minorities in around the world, and particularly when we talk about the life and death of George Floyd. So we picked up that book, SIZWE BANSI is Dead. I think it's a play that I'll recommend people to read, and it's quite enjoyable. You can take from the simplicity and kind of evolve into the complexity of that story. So I think for this week, my recommendation is to pick up SIZWE BANSI is Dead by Athol Fugard, whose birthday it is today. I think 87 years old today, I think, if I remember. So that, I think, is one of the takeaways for this week, but around the theme of what happened to George Floyd and what we need to do to keep the story going, and in what way that we can tap into the past and reshape the future. So we're talking about June 11 and the significance in history, in writing, in the reality of what that day means. Again, on the page, having celebrated Athol Fugard and picked out his play, SIZWE BANSI is Dead, as an illustration, a literary illustration of the indignities that people of color, I don't want to use that phrase people of color, because everybody's got a color, that African American people, black people, that will be the second class, underclass people, what they suffer. I think we go to illustrate that by that book. So June 11. Now I'm going to go to the past, and I haven't got a book to reference it, but literature, books, it's about stories, narratives of the past and put in the context of today. On June 11, let me remember what year it was now. Two people attempted to enroll as undergraduates at the University of Alabama. A guy called George Wallace, the governor of the state himself, showed up at the enrollment center and blocked the path of Vivian Jones and James Hood, that they would not be allowed to enroll as undergraduates in that university. That was on June 12th, if I can find the date. Normally I'm pretty clever with my dates, but I think it's kind of escaped me briefly, but I'll pick it up very quickly. Now, when we're thinking about why George Floyd was pinned down for 8 minutes, 46 seconds, And we want to use this platform to reinforce that message that this is not an aberration, as we all know, but rather something that is systemic. And the governor of Alabama, Governor Wallace, he personally went to the university and blocked the path of these two young Black Americans to prevent them from enrolling to study at university. It took the intervention, direct intervention and instruction from the White House, from J.F. Kennedy, to force him to step aside and allow those two people to enroll in that campus and to continue their studies. Vivian Jones went on to become very successful later in life, and George Wallace went on to lose his office, but continued up till 1972 to be advocating for segregation in America. So when we think about what happened to George Floyd, we need to think about a deeply entrenched value around some of the white people in America, that we cannot allow Black people to associate with us. So 1972 is just 48 years ago, if I can put it together. This is ago. And this man was still campaigning in my own lifetime when I was a youngster that Black and white people should not be working together. Now, definitely there are many people who were in their middle age in 1972 who probably still believe those things. And when we look at what happened when the police officers in Buffalo and in New York rejected an attempt to censure two officers that pushed down a 75-year-old man bleeding from the ear, you get to see a deeply entrenched value system that devalues civil life, first of all, and devalues the life of Black people in America. So while we're trying to look at this this week, I'm going to take it and rest it as we have rested with George Floyd at his funeral on Tuesday. It's important to emphasize the point that the work of restoring the Black man to what he's entitled to, his rightful place in society, as was in a society before they were taken as slaves to America, is not an easy job. And when you're talking about systemic racism, institutionalized racism, especially the power of the police unions in America, where they are protected culturally, politically, and legally from responsibility for their actions, I think slowly we begin to see a shift where the legal protections have been taken away from them and they're going to have accountability. At the end of the day, the benefit of George Floyd's passing will be in establishing clear legal and political mechanisms that prevent abuse of the power of the police, of Black people, or anybody for that matter, and also to challenge the cultural basis of racial discrimination in America in particular, and elsewhere around the world. And we have seen, as students of history, now we have seen all over the world now, a challenge to the establishment, challenging the cultural basis of heroism. Now, how are we celebrating Leopold II of Belgium? And I think I want to go back to 2 weeks ago when I brought out this book, The Scramble for Africa, and I specifically mentioned the atrocities perpetuated by King Leopold II of Belgium in Africa, and the totally barbaric dehumanization of African people. And another side accomplice of him, maybe not to that extreme, was Cecil Rhodes. And it is important that these emblems that celebrate these people need to be questioned. Of course, it is a risky venture. How far do you go? Because again, I've seen on Facebook and other social platforms, people asking for collaborators in Africa who sold people to slavery. I think somebody mentioned in Nigeria, a famous woman called Madam Tinubu, that her statue in Lagos should be pulled down. So it's a tricky business, and it also calls to our own mindfulness to think, how do we participate in oppressing our own people? What is our own role? What do you do so that you don't become a future collaborator, be accused of selling out your own people? Well, how far do we go with correct removing statues of people and doing things like that? I don't know. But I think it is the right thing to do in terms of the most obvious of the cases of abuse, where someone like King Leopold of Belgium should not be celebrated by any right-thinking person because of the atrocities that he committed. And despite the fact that his wealth, the wealth he built up, has shaped part of modern Europe, Belgium, his home country, it calls for question that lives were wasted, and not just wasted, people are dehumanized and treated like waste just to satisfy the spoils of empire. So again, I cannot say enough. If you really want to get into the meat of what the underpins the white supremacist idea, you'll find a lot of it in this book. I just opened the chapter, part 3, which says the rights of conquest. So there are people are going around Europe, America, Africa, believing they have the right to conquer and to plunder and to do what they like in the name of empire, in the name of king and queen, or in the name of the cross, and take the Bible and evangelize and do all sorts of things. It's important that we are mindful of what that means. So I think on that note, I can't recommend it more enough, but it is instructive that the attempt to pull down these emblems of oppressors, which they are, and villains of history, is something that rightfully belongs to the campaign to gain from the unfortunate death of George Floyd, that we need to move things on. Again, it has to do with the teaching of history and the literary traditions that we celebrate in contemporary society, that young people today in Western societies in America and in Europe and around the world need to be exposed to African writing, African thought, and not be alienated or encouraged to devalue because it's from a black place, so to speak. That this is black people. What do they know? So part of work that needs to be done in society is to go to the diaspora. If you live abroad, you're an African, of excellence. Be one of the people who are proclaiming the value of black thinking, black achievement. Encourage who are not familiar with it. Be the ambassador, be the mentor to colleagues, your white folk. Let them see a bit more of what it is. And I think it challenges also the existence in diaspora, for example, for many people, many of us. We choose to live in our enclaves. We go to weekend parties and Ashwebi, and we do as we do if we're in Lagos or in Nairobi or in Joburg. But then our influence is limited if we do not to influence and persuade and convert and let them people see us for what they are. Thankfully, we have been able to use music and literature and film to project a lot of what is organic and special to us as black people. And some societies are taking it in. So the more of that thing we do, we are cultural ambassadors. We shouldn't be ashamed to project what we are. Shouldn't be embarrassed to wear your agbada or wear your kente to events that you're called to. So people can see beyond the veil. Actually, this guy's a brilliant chap. Just chooses to come in his agbada, and it's not nothing ridiculous, nothing unpleasant about that. So that is the cultural battle that we need to try to fight. And I think going forward, I will be recommending appropriate kind of selected cultural books or things like that that we can use for our own benefits, and then we can share with our friends and put on our platforms, so people can get to see that behind our suits and our tie and so on, so there is the interesting black person that actually is quite engaging, and they have something interesting to say. So that is that part of that. Then the other thing about June 11, which again goes to the root of this George Floyd issue, something very unique. Something unique happened on June 11, 1986. I think that's the date. On June 11, 1986, I think that's the date, that's the year, 1986 or 1988, I think it was. The first 3 black members of parliament were elected in Britain. The 3 black MPs and the first Asian MP was amongst them. And these were Bernie Grant, Dan Abbott, and Lord Boateng. Peter Boateng. Peter Boateng or Leo? It's not a Lord. So we use that. Lord Boateng, Dan Abbott, and Bernie Grant. The late Bernie Grant, and then Keith Vowles. They were elected on the same day. They were the first 3 black MPs and the first female black MP to be elected to Parliament. Why are we celebrating that day today? As part of our literary tradition and cultural tradition as black people, is because when you look at the story of those 3 people, Bernie Grant, Dan Abbott, and Paul Boateng, it flows now, Paul Boateng, you see emblematic the struggle of the black person in the mainstream of Western society. And if you look at these battles that Bernie Grant fought for many years as an activist until he died, it was all about the marginalization of the black people in Britain, the marginalization of people, of minority people, trying to escalate their case and make them more relevant. That was the cause that Bernie Grant fought from the day he was elected until he passed away. Then Dan Abbott, the first black female MP in the United Kingdom. We are familiar with her story and how she's had to endure a lot of travails, mainly because essentially she's a black MP. I remember, I think also we should realize that it doesn't sometimes matter how highly placed you are as a black person in society. There's always going to be people high above you or beside you or below you who just don't like you because you're a black person and whatever much you achieve. It doesn't take away from your achievement, but it is that, for example, the double standards. So, for example, when Diana Abbott had one son, and she sent her son to go to school in Ghana, and in a private school in Ghana. And she was accused of betraying the cause, double standards, not following the procedure, not doing what is right. But when Tony Blair and his wife chose to take their son out of the state school system to the London Oratory School, they were accused of double standards also, but it's always different for this black woman. A single parent, she couldn't cope, and all sorts of things like that. So it's never easy whether when you are an achiever or whether you're not an achiever. It's always going to be some kind of weapon trained on you to shoot you down one way or the other, to bust your bubble, so to speak. And I think the experience of Dan Abbott as a shadow Home Secretary, so my Majesty's position, was an example of how she was not even tolerated to keep that office. It was considered how can this black woman be the shadow home secretary? She wants to be running stuff and doing things. And so there is a call for authenticity that we have to, as black people in public office or in public life, have to project. And you end up having to do 10 times more validation just to stay on the same place with your white colleagues in that context. Again, thirdly, Lord Boateng, who was Ambassador High Commissioner to South Africa during the Blair government, probably enjoying his time now in the House of Lords. Another fiery character, and he had was one of the bright lights in the Labour movement, but his light dimmed. Suddenly, he was very active in the opposition. The moment they got into power, was expected to get a cabinet position, senior person, but he didn't get it. They sent him to South Africa to probably drink wine and chill with Nelson Mandela. So it's this kind of things that when we talk about racism and the preferencing system and the way people are edged out or giving something, that is an example of it. There's a guy called Trevor Phillips who was Tony Blair's boss when they were at Oxford. He was the president of the Oxford Union before he handed over the Oxford Union presidency to Tony Blair. Was his boss, senior man, very active in the Labour Party. And when Labour won power in 1997, we're expecting that Trevor Phillips would be in the government. He'll be doing something now. They gave him the job of a chairman of the Racial Equality Commission. Imagine that. So it's a big battle to find that validation and to really keep yourself motivated in the midst of that kind of systemic a deselection by subterfuge of black people in that thing. I suppose again the current travails of Dr. Adesina at the African Development Bank, the AFDB, orchestrated by the Americans, is an example again of how imperialist forces they don't stop. They don't just want to finish off the poor and keep them where they are. They also don't mind. They actually like to take out the big beasts. Are you overreaching yourself now? You think you're a big boy now. Who do you think you are in the global system? And they take you down. So we need to know, I think in Yoruba, we call it Tiwantiwa. Our own is our own. We need to always be mindful of our own and our things and project what is authentic to us and using all the resources we have. And I think part of it is that very sad statement that somebody made many years ago, which I found really offensive. I don't know the basis of it, but a very offensive statement that was made many years ago, probably from an anonymous origin, that if you want to keep something away from a black man, put it in a book. And that is sense that Africans don't read or black people don't read, that we're just... And if you want to keep anything from them, put it in a book, they'll never open it. I think that is a sad commentary for me to make that commentary, but I think it's also important that that narrative, whatever it is, we need to turn it around, and we need to invest a lot in our intellectual, let me use a big word, perspicacity. I think it's wrong English. We gotta just invest in our mind and let it blow and be more resourceful and ingenious, especially thinking about our own thought systems. Because if you borrow another person's thought systems, they're not your own. You're going to be a fake. You're going to be fake. You're going to be fake. So one, I would be recommending a book about how to get original thinking in your own African personality. And what comes to mind very quickly, for example, is my old professor, my old vice chancellor when I was in Nigeria at Ife, Professor Wande Abimbola, who is an exemplary, authentic Yoruba man, African man par excellence. I will be putting on later on one of his books that really validates the originality and the special nature of African thinking from the Yoruba perspective. And I'll find another one from elsewhere. I think I'll probably get something from Uganda or something or somewhere. But we need to refocus our mind, get our own cultural awareness acute, jacket and a tie or something. But my mindset, my thinking should always be, is this idea that has been proposed by someone in the UN, an idea being proposed by some agency from the international community, is it actually in the interest of Africa? Do we actually understand what is going on? And it is perhaps by investing in our own intellectual capability, reading what actually is useful to us, that we can get make a headway out of the cultural imprisonment that we have been put in. But we can say so with the government. We want an African Union government. But let's start with the individual and let's cascade. Let's ripple out into the ocean of African consciousness and spread it across the world to America, elsewhere around, and be like the diasporans in Cuba, be like the diasporans in Argentina and in Brazil, and take some from them, from the old world to the new world and back, and let's take it out there. So I will be putting out 1 or 2 books that I think a mind on what it means to do African thinking, African thought, that helps us to insulate ourselves from the attempts by the Western society or foreign ideologies to overwhelm us and turn us into what we are not. And we become not just physically enslaved, also intellectually become enslaved. It's not easy, but I'm sure we can get there. So that, on that point, are the 3 things I wanted to talk about to kind of round up these 2 tributes to in memory of George Floyd, to talk about the history, as we did last week, but sort of about slavery and enslavement, and then also to talk about the significance of systemic racism and how it is entrenched in society. That it's so entrenched that when you even bring foreigners into, they still want to perpetuate kinds of practices, because for them it's like the old colonial master coming back to Africa to do what they think they can just do and get away with it. One thing again that I must draw to your attention, I'm sure many of us are aware of it, is that there was a video going on about, I think it was the South African politician who was talking about how South Africans are maltreating other Africans and things like that. Of course, it's not possible not to have nationalist tendencies in society and how countries compete. But we need to be a brother's keeper, first of all. We need to be a brother's keeper. And even though the Europeans also, they are insulated from it, they fight themselves, they about football, people have fights and brawls and kill themselves. But we need to be much more in tune with what it means to be a brother's keeper. And that, as they say, if you point one finger to me, you're 4 pointing back in your direction. So we need to be further mindful. And before we can take ask and demand being fair treatment, that we also give treatment to ourselves first. That is one of the things I think is important. But these are not easy things to do. But I think on a legal level, in a political level, there's a lot that can be achieved. And an ambassador, we're able to make a difference. Now, I don't want to take more of your time. Thank you very much for staying with me and watching this. episode to round off the tribute by Native Only Book Club to the memory of George Floyd. It doesn't end there, but I think from next week we'll go back to talking more about books. We'll try to find a format where we can actually recommend books that we have read or you've read something, and we're going to try again still get to this process of making things more interactive, getting people phone in. You might have to go and do a Zoom call where we can get people to log in and we can have an interactive chat. We're still working on the kind of technical details of how to get that done. But when it starts, it'll be great fun and we all have a good time. I want to go down a bit soft. There is this book that I read many years ago as a youngster because my dad, he loved reading, he loved reading and writing, and he wanted us to be reading as much as we could. So he showed us. So of course the library was stocked with very hard books. I remember reading 1984 by George Orwell in 1984. I remember, and then reading lots of other books, complex Greek tragedies and something like that. But also, it's also important that not all literature is hard stuff. You don't have to read, as I said last time, some time ago, you don't need to read complicated stuff. You don't need to read Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace to enjoy literature. So, because it's a weekend coming up, and I know people want to have a bit of fun and relax a little bit, so I'm going to be recommending, if you can get a copy of it, this book called 79 Park Avenue by Harold Robbins. It's a fantastic story, and I'm thinking it's one you can get through in a couple of days. I don't think I bought it, but I read it 20 years ago. I think my wife bought a copy when she came to England, and she paid 50p for it, 50 pence. Must be quite a few years ago from the library. So Harold Robbins, and I can read the blurb. It says Harold Robbins lifts the lead on the call girl racket and uncovers a world of corruption and brutality, of vice and violence, and one girl, Marja Floyd, a wildcat beauty who certainly didn't come out of the ark. And somehow Noah's Ark, I think something about. A prostitute who gave her body to anyone but her heart to only one man, Mike Keys, who loved her, lost her, and found her again when her address was 79 Park Avenue. It definitely promises to be a riveting read. So if you can get your hand on it, I'm sure it'll be available on some kind of e-publishing platform. You know, you can probably go around to a local library or, no libraries. Shut down, isn't it? COVID-19 shut down. No libraries there, but I'm sure you can find this somewhere online for some pennies. But I think for the weekend, you will. I think it'll be a very nice read for the weekend to chill in your garden or somewhere on the sofa, and we can compare notes and see what you find most amusing or interesting about it. So, on that note, I want to pull the curtains on today's show, but of course, again, we cannot do that without a tune, which today is again repeating that tune by Oliver Mutukuzuzi, and this is Todi.
What shall we do?
Great time. Thank you very much.